now hiding at home, who want to leave the country.
It's a scene that would have seemed unthinkable just 1 week ago. The Taliban now in charge of the government in Afghanistan. Our own Ian Pannell, the only American television correspondent in the room, putting questions to the Taliban at their first news conference in 2 decades. The militants promising to honor women's rights under Islamic law, allowing female journalists to continue working today. This comes as the race against time at the airport in Kabul continues, as many as 11,000 Americans trying to escape. And tonight we're hearing from a journalist who arrived in the U.S. on Friday. She's now incredibly worried about her family, including her sister, who is a journalist still stuck in Kabul tonight.
The United States should take some guarantees, should monitor what's going on in Afghanistan, and should not let them to just take Afghanistan back to 20 years ago.
The Biden administration now facing tough questions about Afghanistan's future and why the country fell so quickly. A boost in protection is on the way for vaccinated Americans tonight. The Biden administration is expected to allow booster shots for all vaccinated people. What you need to know and when you'll be able to get yours. Tonight, as hospitalizations surge, the frontline worker shortage. Our report on the nurses reaching a breaking point.
I have no idea how to help my own nurses anymore. They're leaving the profession, they're leaving their job, and we need to have a solution.
The remnants of Fred slamming parts of the country, and now there's a new danger headed our way. The major concern in California is high winds are fueling new fires and forcing new evacuations. Our Ginger Z is tracking it all for us. In Haiti tonight, residents hunkered down after a tropical storm slammed the island. And just days after that devastating earthquake, Matt Gutman is on the ground there tonight. Going back to school. We've all seen the videos of the unruly passengers this summer and flight attendants struggling to deal with the situation. Tonight, the self-defense class that's teaching them how to respond. Today, parkour. Tomorrow, the world. An incredible glimpse into the future. The robot that's learning this parkour course literally on the fly. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. We begin tonight with the urgent race to evacuate people from Kabul as the Taliban tightens its grip on the country that it took over in just a matter of days. And one major complicating factor in the push to evacuate, a single road. Once again, today, hundreds of Afghans lining up outside the airport, desperately trying to get out. The Taliban spokesman promising they would have amnesty, but adding they don't want them to leave. The problem is how to get them to the airport. The Taliban controls the road, and it is only letting foreigners, not Afghans, pass. Tonight, the U.S. government sending an ominous email that says it cannot guarantee your security as you make this trip. U.S. military flights evacuated more than 1,000 people today, including 330 U.S. citizens and permanent residents. Down the road in Kabul, the Taliban face questions for the first time in 20 years from international media, including our Ian Pannell, claiming they want to create an inclusive Islamic government and women will have, quote, all their rights within the limits of Islam. But tonight, many Afghans are doubtful. Ian Pannell leads us off tonight from Kabul.
Tonight, the flight from Kabul. As many as 11,000 American citizens and tens of thousands of Afghans now desperately trying to get out. 4,000 U.S. troops securing the airport here. One day after Afghans swarmed the runways, clinging to a cargo plane, the Air Force now investigating reports several people were killed falling from it. This new video showing several men sitting on the side of the plane as it taxied. The Taliban dispersing crowds trying to get into the airport today as evacuation flights resumed. To access those evacuation flights on the military side of the airport, Afghans must first pass through Taliban-controlled civilian areas, the runway dividing the two. But for now, the Taliban only letting foreigners through. The US planning to launch one flight an hour, up to 9,000 people departing each day. But so many still far from getting on those planes.
Stuck at the North Gate. We have no idea what's going to happen. It's 10:13 p.m. and still we have no idea how this is going to work.
That former interpreter, who we're not identifying to protect his safety, telling us the Taliban later showed up firing shots to clear the area. US officials confirming today there's now direct communication with the Taliban to manage the evacuations.
The Taliban have informed us that they are prepared to provide the safe passage of civilians to the airport, and we intend to hold them to that commitment.
Today, the Taliban holding their first press conference since seizing power, promising amnesty for all those who worked with American and NATO forces, vowing not to hunt them down or seek retribution.
What guarantees will you give to the Afghans who are now hiding at home, who want to leave the country, who the Americans will transport? They can't get to the airport. So what guarantees?
We are assuring the safety of all those who have worked with the United States and allied forces, whether as interpreters or any other field that they have worked with them. As for their talents and their skills, we do not want them to leave the country. We want them to serve their own homeland.
And we met the foot soldiers now taking over security in the city.
Assalamu alaikum.
Now Afghanistan will be a safe place for you people, because we are saving the security. We don't permission other people to discover the security of Afghanistan.
So you're saying the country is now safe for foreigners?
Yes.
In a PR blitz, the Taliban also claiming women will be able to work and girls can continue their education, but making it clear the rights of Afghan women will follow strict Sharia law.
Women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is in work or other activities, because women are a key part of society. And we are guaranteeing all their rights within the limits of Islam.
These brave women journalists back on the streets of Kabul today, testing the militants' claims. But despite the public assurances, there are already reports of reprisals outside the capital. This former Afghan interpreter, now a refugee, pleading for his family who are still stuck in Afghanistan.
Do not punish my family. Do not leave them behind, because that's going to cause lots of life. If anything happened to my family, you know, how can I live that life after?
Just horrific accounts on the ground there. Ian Pannell joins us now. Ian, the Taliban promised a more inclusive government, and while some women are back out in the streets in Kabul, what more do we know about what's happening outside of the capital?
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay. I mean, there were a lot of promises in that press conference and very few details, and that's why the mood out on the streets is still very subdued. There's a sadness, a darkness that's settled on the city, and until the Taliban proved that actually they're true to their word, that they have changed, that women will be given rights, that the enemies of the Taliban will not be pursued and tortured and executed, as we've seen in some of those gruesome videos, then I don't see life returning to any kind of normality. People are voting with their feet. Many are just staying behind closed doors. Many shops are still closed. We're kind of hearing more and more life returning to the streets. People are trying to be nice with the Taliban. So far, they've behaved well with people. They're on a PR blitz trying to convince people that they've changed. But until the new government gets into place, until they start enacting policies, until women are able to actually see for themselves whether or not they have anything like the rights they enjoyed just 1 week ago, then people will not be happy.
And what do we know about the Afghan men and women who helped the U.S. over the past 20 years, who are still there but so desperate to get out?
Yeah, I mean, they're really desperate to get out, and not least because of the rapid pace at which Kabul fell to the Taliban, and then the panicked, desperate scenes that we saw at the airport. If you were here in fear for your life, were told that perhaps you would get a visa to go to America and you would be safe, and then suddenly you've got the Taliban on your doorstep, then clearly you're going to be in a state of panic. And we've been in contact with one of those special immigrant visa applicants. He'd worked with the Green Berets as a translator, the veterans who he helped back in America, lobbying to get him out there. He went to try and get onto the military base today, couldn't even get close to the gate. He said at least 90% of the other people who were in the crowd hadn't worked for the Americans, weren't special immigrant visa applicants. They're just people who want to leave the country, albeit understandably they're not eligible. And at the moment, the US is saying that it has issued that all personnel have gone out of the country. Now US civilians and those Afghans can make their way to the airport, but they have to do it on their own volition, which means they have to run the gauntlet of every Taliban checkpoint between home and the airport. Lindsay?
Harrowing, to be sure. Ian Panel, our thanks to you. Last Friday, journalist Nasrin Nawaz left Kabul, Afghanistan to study on a Fulbright scholarship in journalism at the University of Nebraska. Less than 2 days later, the Taliban took control of the city and country that she'd lived in for her entire life and where her parents and sister remain tonight. Nasrin, who's also a former journalist with BBC Persian, joins us now from Lincoln, Nebraska. Nasrin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You wrote in a Washington Post op-ed yesterday, "My Taliban nightmare came true. I left, but my sister couldn't." Your sister is also a journalist. She tried to make it out, but wasn't able to. What happened?
That day, everything just was a mess. It happened in a glance. People started running away to their homes from streets, and my sister was one of them. She just ran to the house and locked the door. And after that, the person just called her, the one who we know, and said, "I'm going to help you to get out of here right now. So grab your passport and come to the airport." My father took her to the airport, but it was a very crowded day. She was stuck in traffic jam. And I was just crying right here that what if they find her on the street? What if something happened here and she never arrives to the airport? Before arriving there, the person just called back and said, "Don't come because all the flights are canceled." U.S. just started to evacuate their air forces and staff, so everything was just suspended. We had maybe 2 or 3 flights done that day, and after that, all the flights got suspended till now. So there is just a hope for so many people there that if their flight resolve and they can just get out of there, although they don't want to leave home.
Do you have any sense if she will be able to get out at this point?
It's hopeless that we think there is no way right now. But yeah, we think if something happens, like Taliban accepts that the U.S. have the control of the airport and resolve normal flights, it may happen. But for now, just there are some emergency and specific flights done just for the military and people who work with U.S. Otherwise, no. Right now, we should just wait. And everyone is waiting to see what will happen.
We've been watching the scenes from the Kabul airport this week, showing hundreds of Afghans trying to leave the country on U.S. flights. The Taliban has said that they will not retaliate against those who helped the allied forces who remain in Afghanistan or served in the Afghan army. What are you hearing about the first days under Taliban rule?
I heard so many different things. Most of them just narrates the fear that people had, because everyone has some memories of Taliban from the previous regime, that it was so dark, it was so terrifying, it was full of cruelty, and people just remember all those public execution, all those women beating, or just taking away girls, or just arresting some men, killing them, or such kind of a story. So the time that they entered in Kabul, the majority of people were thinking that, yeah, they are coming, they will fight, or they will start taking away some people, specifically journalists, social activists, female who were active, and like artists, some kind of this people. And I heard that my friends, one of them just started to go to the airport at night, and she stayed there for 2 days, and now she's back to her house alone and stuck there without any other plan.
There was a spokesperson for the Taliban today who said, and I just want to quote, he said, women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is at work or activities, because women are a key part of society, and we are guaranteeing all their rights within the limits of Islam. Are people on the ground believing that?
Exactly. We heard that. And they constantly emphasized on this during the last year, but we have never believed. Women like me don't believe this kind of words, because first they said, okay, you can educate, you can go to work, you can be part of this society, but under the Sharia law. But he never gave any context of what's Sharia law. And we have different kind of definition for this Sharia law. We were living in an Islamic regime, but we were not banned to so many other limitations. There was not the government to choose our lifestyle and our clothes. We were obeying the rules, the law.
How transformative have the past 20 years been for the rights of women in Afghanistan? We witnessed so many transformation, not just about women, about all the youth generation. Women were capable to make businesses, women were judges, women were sports in the sports field. I myself was cycling in Afghanistan. My sister was doing this. We were part of the national team. But do you think that it will be possible after Taliban? I'm sure that, you're still processing and taking all of this in. Have you considered at all what you might do in the future yet, as far as if you will stay in the United States or perhaps apply for citizenship here?
It's the most difficult question for now, because I really applied for returning. I wrote my statement. There are so many details that I will have my own research and communication center in future in Afghanistan. I planned for that perfectly. I already talked with some people who I wanted to make a group and establish our company, our center. But now I think I cannot just plan anything. And it's not just me. No one else has a plan right now, because we should wait what will happen. I will definitely go back to my country if there is a peace and if there is a respect to human rights. And I promise this to Fulbright. But I cannot make any certain plan right now. I don't know. I really deserve, like many other humans in this world, to live in peace and use my potential. I would prefer to use it in my country.
Understood. Nasra Nawa, we thank you so much for your time and joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And as many are well aware, the political fallout continues to grow from the U.S. decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. Members of both parties are now questioning how the decision came about, especially the contingencies if things did not go quite as expected. There are many questions tonight, but perhaps chief among them, was the White House warned by intelligence that what happened was a possibility, and was that guidance ignored? ABC's Stephanie Ramos is back at the White House for us tonight.
24 hours after saying the buck stops with him, President Biden is at Camp David, leaving his advisors to defend his handling of the unfolding crisis in Afghanistan.
What is he taking ownership of? Not just the decision to leave Afghanistan, but is he taking responsibility for the chaos that happened during the evacuations and for any bloodshed that may be happening right now? Is he taking responsibility for that?
He's taking responsibility for every decision the United States government took with respect to Afghanistan because, as he said, the buck stops with him. I am also taking responsibility, and so are my colleagues. At the same time, that doesn't change the fact that there are other parties here responsible as well.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the president is monitoring developments and troop movements by the hour.
The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
But one U.S. intelligence official tells ABC News leaders were told by the military it would take no time at all for the Taliban to take everything. No one listened.
Did the White House disregard that intelligence and push ahead?
I'm not actually familiar with the intelligence assessment you're describing, but I also don't want to get into specific intelligence products.
Watching this all unfold, families of fallen American soldiers. In Flint, Michigan, Terry Johnson trying to reassure fellow Gold Star parents.
It would be very easy to go to a dark place and be angry and disappointed, but I can't allow myself to do that, because then it would be allowing maybe the thought of the sacrifice not making a difference.
Many wondering if those deaths were in vain. Our thanks to Stephanie. We are joined now by Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss, who served in Afghanistan with the Marine Corps back in 2012. Congressman, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Good to be on.
You've defended President Biden's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan, and you've also said that based on what we knew, the sudden Taliban takeover was a possibility but not an inevitability. So if we knew this was possible, should we have executed with a more orderly withdrawal?
Every military mission concludes with an after-action review where everyone takes off their rank and gets feedback on decisions made and courses of action that could have been improved on. That's just part of life in the military. I am certain that'll be done in the case of the withdrawal. My focus right now, though, is not on pointing fingers one way or the other. It's on the situation on the ground. The international airport in Kabul is secured. Commercial and military flights are resuming. They're going to get 5,000 to 9,000 refugees out daily, at least through August 31st. That includes allied Afghans, journalists, and prominent advocates for the rights of women and girls who may be subject to Taliban reprisal. The situation at the airport and with evacuations is rapidly coming into hand.
And so what about the road they're going to be able to get? Because a lot of people are saying, yes, operations are starting to resume as normal at the airport, but they can't get safely to the airport.
And for that reason, the administration is in direct talks with the Taliban about safe access to the airport, and I know is also working with NGOs throughout the country, in and outside of the capital region, to try to secure passage for those who need to evacuate.
President Biden says the buck stops with him, but he's also kind of thrown shade over the policies of the Trump administration that helped get us here. Do you think politically Biden needs to own this withdrawal?
Again, the politics in Washington should not be the focus right now. We've got a dynamic situation overseas, and politics should stop at the water's edge. What's important is that we are evacuating American personnel, that we're evacuating Afghan allies, and that this president, as commander-in-chief, has taken ownership, finally, of a failed forever war. He made the high-integrity decision that he was not going to hand off a boondoggle of a counterinsurgency to a fifth administration, and for that, he does deserve credit.
President Biden also stated that the mission in Afghanistan was always to get Osama bin Laden. Of course, as we stated, you served in 2012 after his death. What did you think the mission was?
There was no mission by the time I was there, and that is really the foundational failure of Afghan foreign policy over the last 20 years. What began right after 9/11 as a tightly scoped counterterrorism mission focused on denying a base of operations for terrorists and for bringing to justice the architects of 9/11, mutated under Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld into this counterinsurgency with no endgame. Because to win a counterinsurgency, you need to counter the insurgents, and you counter the insurgents with a local government capable of providing basic services, rule of law, a civil society in which individuals can flourish. None of that emanated from central government in Afghanistan. Instead, they devolved into incompetence and corruption. And for this, both the United States and Afghanistan take a lot of blame. Us for allowing it to continue for so long, and Afghan central government leaders for not seizing the opportunity of a lifetime when they had American support to build a new nation. This president recognized that there was no political solution to the counterinsurgency and that we had to end it.
Have you spoken to any Gold Star families since the Taliban takeover?
I have not.
Okay. Hindsight, of course, is 20/20, but looking back, do you think that President Biden should have followed the advice of the military leaders who wanted to leave a small residual force behind in Afghanistan beyond the fall of 2021?
I think it's important to really understand the stark decision that this president inherited from predecessors. It was ramp up the U.S. military footprint in Afghanistan, because once that May 1st deadline was passed, it was Taliban fighting season, and 2,500 troops was not going to cut it. I mean, it's taken twice that to secure an airport. Imagine what it would take to secure Afghanistan in the face of the Taliban onslaught. So it was either ramp up the U.S. military presence, enter a third decade of fighting, or it was to tell a hard truth to the American people and a hard truth to the Afghan government that without a viable political endgame, we had to wrap up a failed forever war.
Would you say that the U.S. is less safe now that the Taliban rules Afghanistan?
I'm not going to prognosticate on how the Taliban is going to govern. This is a regime that has defied expectations repeatedly, and that is so extreme in its ideology that it's impossible to get inside their head. What I will say is that the United States retains the prerogative to execute over-the-horizon counterterrorism missions anywhere in the world. Anybody who has the capability and the will to strike the U.S. homeland is subject to counteraction by the United States, and we're going to retain that capability in Afghanistan as well.
Representative Jake Auchincloss, we thank you so much for your time and, of course, your service in our military.
Thanks for having me on.
Switching gears now, as hospitals in the COVID hot zones continue to struggle under the surge of COVID patients, ABC News has learned the Biden administration will likely recommend a third COVID dose to all vaccinated Americans. Eva Pilgrim has more on that looming recommendation.
Tonight, federal health officials are expected to announce as early as tomorrow that they will now recommend all Americans get a COVID booster shot, a third vaccine dose, 8 months after you were fully vaccinated. An announcement from the Biden administration could come tomorrow and would affect those who got the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. This as Israeli scientists released new data finding Pfizer's vaccine was less effective at preventing severe COVID symptoms among those 65 and older who were fully vaccinated back in January. The NIH director today.
Vaccine protection does gradually wane over time. In the Israeli data, the people who got immunized in January are the ones that are now having more breakthrough cases. That's the same thing we're starting to see in the U.S. data.
David pressing Dr. Fauci last week on what the Israelis are seeing in their data and why they're ahead of us in recommending a third shot.
It would seem the Israelis, though, are ahead of us on this. Just today approving booster shots for 50 and older starting next week, 40 and older expected a short time after that. So what are they seeing in the numbers that we're not?
What they're seeing in their population, David, is that when they go down over several months, they do pretty well, and then they have what looks like a pretty sharp drop in the efficacy. What holds up well, which is good news, is that they still get good protection against severe disease leading to hospitalization and death. But the protection against symptomatic infection and early infection has gone down considerably.
Now, a third shot likely here in the U.S. for everyone. The booster shot rollout could begin as early as next month, pending FDA authorization.
The idea is that those who were first in line when the vaccines first rolled out would essentially be the first ones eligible for the booster. And that would be healthcare workers, residents of nursing homes, and then eventually the gradual expansion to the rest of the population.
It comes as the Delta variant tears across much of the U.S. In Texas, statewide hospital ICU capacity now reaching more than 90%. Governor Greg Abbott, who has resisted mask mandates there, now testing positive for COVID-19 despite being vaccinated. He says he is asymptomatic so far. This afternoon, the federal government confirming it will extend its mask mandate for travelers on planes, trains, and buses into January.
That couple dying before they were able to get vaccinated. And Eva, with regard to this third shot, you mentioned the Moderna and Pfizer boosters, but what if you were vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson dose?
Well, there's almost 12 million Americans who got the J&J shot. They're waiting on more data about J&J and boosters, but we are told that they expect that recommendation will follow the J&J shot for a booster as well. The White House is expected to speak tomorrow about these booster shots. The president will be there to talk about the next steps, and they acknowledge the fact that they have a lot of work cut out for them. Not only are they pushing these boosters, but they still need to convince millions of unvaccinated Americans to get that very first dose. Lindsay?
Eva Pilgrim, our thanks to you. The death toll in Haiti after that 7.2 earthquake has risen tonight as residents on the island are now also struggling to survive from Tropical Storm Grace. ABC's Matt Gutman is on the ground for us once again.
Tonight in Haiti, roads choked with mud and debris, rivers swollen and fast after Tropical Depression Grace plowed through the earthquake-rattled country. And the search for the hundreds missing
Anybody hear me?
resuming after being suspended for about 12 hours. The U.S. Coast Guard also resuming medevacs. The damage is everywhere in these villages. Help has not been. Thousands sleeping outdoors. Overnight, we met Sarah and her family cooking a meal under this leaky tarp.
This tarp is basically held up by a stick, and that's all they have right now.
They said they weren't sure what they'd do when the storm hit. In the morning, we found them, soaked.
This is what's left of the tarp.
So many across the storm and quake-ravaged country just struggling to survive.
Matt Gutman joins us now from on the ground in Haiti. Matt, we can see the rescue operation still ongoing there.
They are. I mean, these medevac helicopters, Lindsay, have been taking about 100 patients out over the past couple of days. But this hospital here, I'm going to have our cameraman pan over. They're desperate. There is no water here. There is no electricity. They are extremely short on blood, on IVs. There are no surgical gloves here. They've even been conducting surgery outdoors in a tent. In fact, all of the patients are in the hallways and in the center courtyard inside that hospital. They say they need supplies and they need them immediately. Lindsay.
Yeah, lots of desperation there. Matt Gutman, our thanks to you. When we come back, the chilling cell phone video, a woman heard pleading for help in a van, then the door shuts and they drive away. What authorities would like the public to do? We've all seen the videos, unruly passengers and the flight attendants struggling to contain them. Our team recently visited a new self-defense class for these flight attendants. But up next, as this pandemic rages on, our healthcare heroes are starting to burn out, and the consequences of that are only getting worse.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it, these days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news source. Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live. This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're going to move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. Good Morning America, #1 in the morning, 9 years running. World News Tonight with David Muir, #1 in the evening with America's most watched newscast. 2020, the #1 news magazine on Friday nights. The View, the #1 daytime talk show. And ABC News Live, #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
Welcome back. Tonight, as COVID cases surge across the country, mostly among the unvaccinated, the strain on our healthcare system and our frontline workers as bad as it's ever been. Some states are having to limit capacity at hospitals because staffing levels are so low. And tonight, there is real concern about burnout. Our Ariel Reshef reports.
On the front lines of a seemingly unrelenting pandemic, tonight, healthcare workers are stretched thin, nearing a breaking point.
I think our biggest need right now is nursing staff. We are very short of nursing staff.
Nurses in hospitals across the country are finding themselves overworked and emotionally drained.
Where I might only see one death in one of my shifts, like maybe every week, maybe every other week, I was seeing multiple deaths a night.
According to Health and Human Services, more than 80,000 people are now hospitalized across the country. There are less and less ICU beds available. ABC's Victor Oquendo reporting from the University of Florida.
Of course, if you create more ICU bed, you need trained ICU nurses.
The challenge now facing hospitals is more than just finding beds for patients. They need to find people to treat them, too.
We were thin already. We had lost a number of staff over the course of 2020, and we've been working hard to replace those. So we're thinner than ever before, and this is obviously putting a real strain on the system.
Celebrated as heroes, it's easy to forget the devastating impact the pandemic has had on nurses and doctors.
I have no idea how to help my own nurses anymore. They're leaving the profession. They're leaving their job. And we need to have a solution. We need to end this.
Jennifer Steenberg is the intensive care unit nursing supervisor at Memorial Hermann Southwest Hospital in Houston. She's begging for more help.
I don't see an end in sight. I am now seeing that the sky is falling, and I'm really trying hard not to be that person. But I've done this now for 18, 20 months. And I don't see a way out. That vaccine was our way out, and we're losing our grip on that.
All across the country, including the hard-hit South, where vaccination rates are the lowest, there is an increasing demand for more nurses and more medical staff. In Mississippi, where vaccination rates are only 36%, the same story.
It is exhausting. We spend a week in the ICU per intensivist, and by the end of that week, we are completely drained both emotionally and physically. We work in a team with our nurse practitioners, and so are they. But more than anything else, it's our nurses and the respiratory therapists who basically do this day in and day out, and I'm actually more worried about them.
For nurses like Paulette Rangel, it got to be too much.
As much as we threw at them as far as treatments and medication and things like that, there was just not enough that we could do to save some of them.
Rangel was a nurse for 9 years, 7 in intensive care. She was named Arizona's Nurse of the Year in 2015 by the March of Dimes organization.
You know what the right thing to do is, and you're doing everything that you can for these patients, but ultimately, all of those things are out of your control, and that really just, it changes you.
There was no single tipping point, but she says the unending stream of patients for what is now a preventable illness wore her down.
I went over to my supervisor and asked if I could step down, to fewer work days. And I was denied because we didn't have enough staff.
Paulette left her job last week.
And that just wasn't something that I could handle anymore. And so I made the decision to leave.
Taking a position instead as a supervisor with a local nonprofit administering vaccines.
You just get so mad. You know, you have this anger towards the system, and having to suffer through this, and what you feel like is alone, you know, and nobody understands what we go through.
A statement released by the Florida Hospital Association says 3 out of 4 hospitals there are facing nursing shortages. Mississippi's governor addressing the challenges at a press conference Friday, saying the state has lost 2,000 healthcare professionals in the last year.
Our challenge is much less about the physical aspect of hospital beds or the physical aspect of ICU beds, and it's much more about actually staffing them.
As officials wait for assistance, they're turning to traveling nurses to help fill the staffing gaps. In Texas, 2,500 medical personnel are on the way to relieve hospital workers being pushed to the limit.
Because we have so much less staff, the patient to nurse and doctor ratio is the worst it's ever been.
With so many hospitals nearing a breaking point, nurses like Rangel not ruling out helping their colleagues again.
I loved my job. I absolutely loved it. I just wasn't in the mental state to be able to properly care for my patients in the way that they deserved.
Ariel Reshef, ABC News, New York.
Our thanks to Ariel. Still ahead here on Prime, the explosive new wildfire prompting new evacuations in California with a new fire threat looming. And this video speaks for itself. Unbelievable. But what else can this robot do? And with Afghanistan now in control of the Taliban, we take a look at the American troops left behind after other conflicts by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasen announce they are having a child.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
How cute. Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
what is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
Assault on the Capitol, the ABC News original, exclusively on Hulu, now streaming. With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
Robin Roberts, George Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Wake up with America's #1 most watched morning show. ABC's
Good Morning America.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
Welcome back, everyone. As we now watch Afghanistan fall to the Taliban with lightning speed before the U.S. could make an orderly withdrawal, we take a look at other wartime situations where the U.S. left behind military forces, sometimes for decades after the fighting had ended. We've done this with some mixed results. Here are some examples by the numbers. To date, the U.S. still has more than 47,000 military personnel stationed in Germany, more than 61,000 in Japan, about 15,000 in Italy, and more than 29,000 troops in South Korea. These missions, of course, are vastly different than they were a generation ago, with shifting strategic objectives. More recently, we've placed roughly 2,500 military personnel in Iraq. That's after withdrawing all combat troops and reintroducing them after the rise of ISIS. But in Afghanistan, fewer than 1,000 U.S. troops remained on the ground at the start of the month before the latest deployments to secure the airport. That was down from roughly 100,000 U.S. troops at its peak in the summer of 2010. And we still have lots to get to here on Prime tonight. The tropical threat turning deadly, with the remnants creating a flood threat for millions, and the growing concerns about the T-Mobile hack. What sensitive data was taken? But first, look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. Good Morning America, #1 in the morning, 9 years running. World News Tonight with David Muir, #1 in the evening with America's most watched newscast. 2020, the #1 news magazine on Friday nights. The View, the #1 daytime talk show. And ABC News Live, #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Now streaming on ABC News Live. 2020. True crime. Cinematic. Real-life drama. Stunning. The unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people
squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
The U.S. has resumed air operations at the airport in Kabul after clearing 15,000 people from the runways Monday, many frantically chasing evacuation planes as they took off.
I mean, just for a moment, imagine how desperate you would have to be to try and cling onto a C-17 cargo plane that's about to take off because you're so scared about what might happen if you stay behind.
The Taliban has declared, quote, amnesty across the country, but it's unclear what that means. President Biden told Americans he does not regret the decision to withdraw, but said the collapse happened more quickly than anticipated.
For the rest of us getting booster shots, we should learn more this week. President Biden expected to announce that everyone should get a booster shot 8 months after their second shot. And that could happen as early as this September.
They've been tracking this data in real time, not just here in the United States, but all over the world. In particular, how the vaccine is holding up against the Delta variant. And they're starting to see what looks like a critical dip at the 8-month mark after the 2-dose regimen of an mRNA vaccine like Pfizer or Moderna. Now, this should not be a surprise to anyone. As you said, we've been talking about it in theory for quite some time now. And this happens with other vaccines. We know that immune durability, as it's called, tends to gradually wane over time. It's not like at 8 months, all of a sudden you go to 0, but they're trying to stratify when the right time is to protect the most people as we implement this rollout.
The Caldor fire exploding in size overnight has expansion of evacuation orders over Grizzly Flat. Now the fire behavior here causing huge plumes of smoke, and it's been unpredictable with dry fuels burning and sending embers out in the wind. This has been creating new spot fires rapidly.
Right behind me here is what I can only assume is the Grizzly Flats Elementary School. The reason I can tell is because there still is a sign standing up there that says Grizzly Flats. You can see over here, there's, what's left of the playground here.
Bulldozers brought here to clear out as much as possible, and homes in the area covered in smoke and ash. Others racing to get their horses and livestock out safely.
T-Mobile, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country, confirming today they've had a cyber breach. The telecom giant announcing there was unauthorized access to some T-Mobile data, but says they are still determining the scope of the breach and who was affected. The company releasing a statement saying, "We take the protection of our customers very seriously, and we are conducting an extensive analysis alongside digital forensic experts to understand the validity of these claims."
Tonight, Los Angeles County authorities are seeking the public's assistance after a suspicious incident in which a woman was heard crying for help. A bystander capturing this chilling cell phone video in Santa Clarita late Thursday. A call placed to 911, a door slamming, the vehicle driving off. In a special bulletin, authorities say they're looking for who was in that vehicle described as a light-colored Sprinter-type van with aftermarket solar panels and an air conditioning unit on the roof. So far, police say there have been no reports of any victims or crimes committed.
And a new look at how robots are developing astonishing physical abilities. Boston Dynamics sharing this video showing the company's Atlas robots effortlessly maneuvering through a parkour course. The machines jumping and vaulting their way through obstacles and celebrating with a backflip at the end.
Welcome back. Tonight, the remnants of Tropical Storm Fred are triggering tornado watches and heavy rain from Georgia all the way to New York. Up to 10 inches of rain in the Florida Panhandle, where a man died in his car on a flooded road. There are also 2 more tropical threats tonight and extreme fire danger on the West Coast. Let's bring in Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z. Ginger, first talk us through the tropical threats.
Yes, because there are many, Lindsay. So let's go ahead and get to the map. So the first one's going to show you where the remnants of Fred are circulating over western North Carolina. Now, as those circulate, they make the air rotate, and some of the friction of the land with that motion of the storm, kicking up tornadoes. We've already seen 16 reported. Greenwood to Spartanburg with warnings now, but a watch all the way up to Roanoke. So let me take you through the other threat, and that would be the flash flooding. We've already seen, as you mentioned, 8 to 10 inches of rain in the southern part of this. I think we could easily see 3 to 6 in some other areas, and that's why you see those flash flood watches for much of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Northern Virginia, West Virginia, even New York. So we will get into that moisture. You can actually start to feel it building a bit here. And then you go to the south, to Grace, where we're watching that tropical storm move westward and looks like it could become a Cat 1 hurricane before making landfall right there near Cancun. It will lash over the Yucatan and head towards central Mexico. So we're watching Henri being the final, at least right now, threat. Hey, we're kind of headed toward what is the peak of hurricane season, September 10th, by the way, just to put that in your calendar. That one, Henri, making a little turn, staying a fish storm, but it will kick up surf, not only for Bermuda, but also for the Carolinas. last
That September time frame cannot come soon enough. In the meantime, high winds and dry conditions on the West Coast fueling major concern tonight about the fire danger. We're talking about the next 48 hours.
Yes, critical 48 hours because the relative humidity down to 5%. You've got a little trough moving through that kicks up winds to 45 plus. And then on top of all of this, we're at this point where we have never seen the foliage and the fuel for these fires as dry as it is right now. So let's go ahead and dive in. You can see some of the images. I don't know if you have friends out west, but I certainly do. And they've been telling me it's not just bad, it's like horrific where they cannot get away from the smoke. One of my friends was just driving all through the northern Rockies, eventually made it home to Northern California, and stayed in smoke the whole time. So even if you're not right next to the fires, you are feeling it, smelling it, seeing it, and being impacted by it. You can see the smoke coverage right now. Again, much of Nevada into southern Idaho, Montana, and even into the northern plains. And that's kind of where the red flag warnings find themselves. So we know that we've seen that some of the fires triple in size just today. That's because of those 45-mile-per-hour winds plus. On the other side of it, though, you see on the map there, the flash flood watches. Oh, they're up still for parts of Arizona and Utah because that monsoon flow is kicking. Tucson right now, Lindsay, has had their third wettest monsoon season on record. That's after last year when they had their second driest. So a tale of really two stories. We wish we could send some of it back up to the northwest.
Of course, and that air quality alert so far-reaching. Ginger, we thank you so much. In a memo to flight attendants, United Airlines warned their staff not to duct tape passengers to their seats. That's where we are. After nearly 4,000 reports, according to the FAA, of unruly passengers since January 1st. But now some flight attendants are taking back control of their own safety and others. ABC's Gio Benitez recently visited a one-of-a-kind self-defense flight attendant school. Could it be a model for flight attendants everywhere?
Tonight, with in-flight confrontations between passengers and flight attendants on the rise. More and more flight attendants are turning to self-defense classes to be safer in the skies. The numbers are startling. Since the start of the year, the FAA receiving more than 3,800 reports, more unruly passengers in such a short time than ever before.
This is the biggest direct threat to flight attendants that we have ever faced. People are targeting you, and you've got to walk through this enclosed space with all these people that you don't know, and you can't necessarily see what they're doing.
ABC News inside a recent one-on-one self-defense training class from federal air marshals. It's a TSA program that was paused due to the pandemic. It used to be once a quarter with just 8 or 9 per class. Now it's every month in double digits.
So now you're basically doing 3 or 4 times the number of classes with double the amount of people in it.
Yes, exactly.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. The assaults and the disruptions on the aircraft are higher now than they have been in recent memory to me. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the teamwork between the flight crews and the air marshals.
Watch, grab my wrist.
During the 4-hour course, air marshals teach flight attendants various de-escalation techniques and how to defend themselves if passengers become violent.
Turn and break it away from the thumb.
For flight attendant Stasia Gardner, it's a refresher course with a new mindset.
And this is something where when you took this class the first time years ago, you probably thought, I probably won't have to use a lot of this.
Now I'm like, wait a minute, I might have to use this tomorrow. I hope I don't. But you might have to.
A thought Robin Geilinger never had either after 36 years in the air.
We're not here to beat our passengers. We're here to stop the unrest that has precipitated through this pandemic. And let's get to a calmer environment on the plane. We're all in that together.
And Lindsay, the largest flight attendants union in the country is now calling for this program to be federally mandated. Lindsay?
We see this becoming nationwide. Gio, thank you. Before we go tonight, the image of the day. The men and women around the world, whether it's Germany, Britain, or the United States, making their voices heard in defense of the vulnerable left behind under Taliban rule. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Coming up in the next hour, we're staying on top of several things 20 years later, but now back in power. Are we dealing with the same brutal Taliban as before? Martha Raddatz is standing by. And can you guess the nation that went into lockdown after just talking about one confirmed case of COVID? Stay with us.
World News Now.
And America This Morning.
The best new video.
The breaking news overnight.
Emergency crews called to the town of Surfside.
U.S. airstrikes hitting targets in Iraq and Syria.
The stories people are talking about.
You don't want to shave your legs? Don't. I was going to say.
Oh my. Got it.
And what to expect in the day ahead.
ABC World News Now and America This Morning.
Starting at 2 a.m. Eastern.
Up all night to keep you up to date.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. Good Morning America, #1 in the morning, 9 years running. World News Tonight with David Muir, #1 in the evening with America's most watched newscast. 2020, the #1 news magazine on Friday nights. The View, the #1 daytime talk show. And ABC News Live, #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner for the second straight year with the Edward R. Murrow Award for overall excellence in television. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
This is GMA3, what you need to know. GMA3.
A third hour of Good Morning America in the afternoon.
It's all about you. Lunchtime on ABC.
I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We are monitoring several developments here at ABC News at this hour. 6 family members are expected to make a full recovery after a dramatic rescue operation. The 2 adults and 4 children were hiking when they got caught Sunday in brutal heat. They all suffered heat exhaustion, but again, they are expected to be okay. ABC News has confirmed the federal government will extend the mask mandate for travelers on planes, trains, and buses into January. Of course, the main reason behind this is Delta cases which continue to surge. And President Biden stayed away from the cameras today, leaving the questions about his Afghanistan policy to his advisors. But the finger pointing into how the withdrawal could have gone so wrong and whether or not intelligence indicating that this could happen was ignored by the White House. And as the anger in Washington builds, the Taliban continues to consolidate power. Today, the group held a news conference claiming they want to create a, quote, inclusive Islamic government and that women will have all their rights within the limits of Islamic law. Ian Pannell was the only American network correspondent in the room putting the questions directly to the Taliban.
Tonight, the flight from Kabul. As many as 11,000 American citizens and tens of thousands of Afghans now desperately trying to get out. 4,000 US troops securing the airport here. One day after Afghans swarmed the runways, clinging to a cargo plane, the Air Force now investigating reports several people were killed falling from it. This new video showing several men sitting on the side of the plane as it taxied. The Taliban dispersing crowds trying to get into the airport today as evacuation flights resumed. To access those evacuation flights on the military side of the airport, Afghans must first pass through Taliban-controlled civilian areas, the runway dividing the two. But for now, the Taliban only letting foreigners through. The US planning to launch 1 flight an hour, up to 9,000 people departing each day. But so many still far from getting on those planes.
Stuck at the North Gate. We have no idea what's going to happen. It's 10:13 p.m. and still we have no idea how this is going to work.
That former interpreter, who we're not identifying to protect his safety, telling us the Taliban later showed up firing shots to clear the area. US officials confirming today there's now direct communication with the Taliban to manage the evacuations.
The Taliban have informed us that they are prepared to provide the safe passage of civilians to the airport, and we intend to hold them to that commitment.
Today, the Taliban holding their first press conference since seizing power, promising amnesty for all those who worked with American and NATO forces, vowing not to hunt them down or seek retribution.
What guarantees will you give to the Afghans who are now hiding at home, who want to leave the country, who the Americans will transport? They can't get to the airport. So what guarantees?
We are assuring the safety of all those who have worked with the United States and allied forces, whether as interpreters or any other field that they have worked with them. As for their talents and their skills, we do not want them to leave the country. We want them to serve their own homeland.
And we met the foot soldiers now taking over security in the city.
Assalamu alaikum.
Now Afghanistan will be a safe place for you people because we are saving the security. We don't permission other people to discover the security of Afghanistan.
So you're saying the country is now safe for foreigners?
Yes.
In a PR blitz, the Taliban also claiming women will be able to work and girls can continue their education, but making it clear the rights of Afghan women will follow strict Sharia law.
Women will be afforded all their rights, whether it is in work or other activities, because women are a key part of society. And we are guaranteeing all their rights within the limits of Islam.
These brave women journalists back on the streets of Kabul today, testing the militants' claims. But despite the public assurances, there are already reports of reprisals outside the capital. This former Afghan interpreter, now a refugee, pleading for his family who are still stuck in Afghanistan.
Do not punish my family. Do not leave them behind, because that's going to cause lots of life. If anything happened to my family, you know, how can I live that life after?
Our thanks to Ian on the ground there in the thick of it all. We now bring in Heidi Kuhn, founder and CEO of the California-based humanitarian organization Roots of Peace. Her NGO has worked in Afghanistan for 20 years to support farmers and traders, and now she's pleading with U.S. officials to help evacuate hundreds of her Afghan employees who could be targeted by the Taliban. Ms. Kuhn, we thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Last week, you sent a letter to President Biden asking him to, quote, act decisively and not abandon your 360 Afghan employees whose lives could hang in the balance. So what's the latest? Have any of your employees been able to get out?
Well, Lindsay, we got actually 6 of our 7 expats out of the country. It was in the middle of the night on Saturday evening, right before the fall of Kabul. They got out, 2 of them on an emergency military flight, and they are now in Qatar in a desert area. We're not able to communicate with them because they were separated from their bags, and their phones are not able to be charged. So we are working through contacts to know that they are safe, but we do have 1 employee with his wife and 6 children, unfortunately was not able to make it. He was scheduled to go out on Sunday, and we all saw the catastrophe at the airport. That situation continues. He was supposed to be out a few hours ago, but as he and our driver in Afghanistan reported, 20 people were just shot a few moments ago, and there is mayhem once again at the airport. People who do not have the proper documentations at the North Gate in Kabul are just climbing, literally, to get out of the country for fear of what lies ahead.
Right, understandably so. And you've said that your group works in all 34 provinces of Afghanistan, not just in Kabul. While we can't corroborate your accounts, tell us what you've been hearing from sources throughout the country, including the more remote areas.
Yes, yes. Well, currently, in addition to the expats, I manage over 360 Afghan employees, and they are also my responsibility equally. And I am working very hard. And in the letter to President Biden, thanking him for the 5,000 troops to secure the airport, but a specific request to please keep the airport open so that I can allow my employees who have been faithful for 20 years. Many of them have worked for me for over 16 years, turning mines to vines and basically cultivating high-value crops for export.
We can certainly hear the passion in your voice and understand why. As Ian Pannell reports, the Taliban is now saying that Afghans who worked with the U.S. will be safe and that women can continue their education. Do you believe them?
Well, I like to take the high road in life. And I think, I often think the Taliban have children of their own. They need to feed their children. And many of them do live in these remote areas. Of course, Helmand and Kandahar are the concentration of the Taliban, right? That is their new headquarters, if that is to be. I was here in our offices with our Afghan staff here in San Rafael, California, to 2 a.m. We don't sleep. We take naps and we're up at 5. Because we're processing these very, I would have to say, red tape. I mean, it takes to do one P2 visa and accurately get the every bit of information validated, passports, marriage certificates, birth certificates to ensure that your children are indeed your children when you are qualified to get on those flights. But think if you were running from Badakhshan, to Kabul, and you didn't remember to bring your certificates. Right. So it has been really a nightmare for us, a living nightmare. I sure would love to trust the Taliban. And I always give anyone the benefit of the doubt, because now is the time to hold true to your word. And again, the Taliban have to feed their children. It's a no-win situation.
Heidi Kuhn, we thank you so much for joining us. Certainly wishing you all the best to you and your team. We hope that everyone stays safe.
Thank you.
Staying with the crisis in Afghanistan, we now take a closer look at the Taliban, back in power 20 years after they were initially pushed out by U.S. troops. A big question now, is this the same Taliban that subjugated women and brutally enforced its harsh version of Islamic law? ABC's Martha Raddatz has more.
This was a smarter, more media-savvy Taliban, one that caught the Biden administration off guard. As Taliban forces entered the presidential palace in Kabul over the weekend, Taliban senior leaders were huddled around a laptop, apparently watching their men via live stream. And just like anybody living in the modern age, Twitter is one of its primary weapons in controlling their message. Now posting direct-to-camera messages from rooftops, sharing their locations and assuring their followers the city is under control. Their leader, rarely seen in public, a former Taliban judge. Senior leaders claiming they want to form an inclusive Islamic government. The group is establishing a civilian casualty prevention and complaints commission, tweeting out WhatsApp phone numbers for Afghans to send in complaints. But the previous Taliban rule of Afghanistan was brutal and oppressive. Women had no rights and violence was rampant. And though this new Taliban claim they're not opposed to women attending school, many fear that's not true and that the hard-fought progress of the last 20 years will be erased.
When it comes to the Taliban, while they want to improve themselves, at the same time, they want to rule the country in a certain way, and that involves some oppression of women and not letting women experience the full freedoms in which they deserve. It also involves maintaining connection and ties and relationships to various terrorist groups.
This more organized, controlled facade, reportedly funded by some less than honorable sources, like the production, taxing, and smuggling of poppy, a leading export that goes to the manufacturing of heroin. And while they do have a collection of international private donors, in the past they have collected money through kidnapping for ransom. Their reported biggest expense, weapons and training. And the group itself remains a designated terrorist organization under U.S. and UN sanctions. A U.S. intelligence report earlier this year warned al-Qaeda is still entrenched in their leadership, although they pledged to deny safe haven to terrorists under a deal with President Trump. Countries like Iran, Russia, and China say they are willing to deal with the Taliban. China is saying it's ready for friendly and cooperative relations. Questions remain about what role Afghanistan's neighbor and nuclear power Pakistan played in the Taliban victory. The country nurtured the Taliban and was often accused of meddling in the war. Experts say what the Taliban ultimately wants is power and to rule their own Islamic State, a return to the way things were when they last ruled. But there's a very real and immediate threat to those who once stood in their way.
They probably are going to want to exert some degree of punishment against the Afghans who worked with us because they'll see them as threats. It's unclear what degree of punishment that will be, but it could even include executions.
Our thanks to Martha Raddatz for that. Back home now to the latest on the coronavirus pandemic. More than 83,000 people are currently hospitalized with COVID-19 across the country. And there's growing concern about unvaccinated children. All this as the Biden administration is expected to recommend booster shots for most Americans. ABC's Rena Roy has the latest.
As the U.S. reports more than 200,000 new cases in a single day for the third time this month, a sigh of relief for some of the most vulnerable in this country, like Nate Zavin of New York, who's had multiple kidney transplants.
I was in a very vulnerable category of people. I've known a lot of people who've gotten sick. I know a lot of people who have not made it out of the pandemic. It means a lot that I can do this.
Zavin got his third COVID shot after the CDC recommended the extra layer of protection for the nearly 3% of Americans who are immunocompromised. And now millions more coast to coast could soon be doing the same, with the White House expected to announce most Americans should get booster shots 8 months after their second dose, as the Delta variant tears through the nation. The rate of pediatric hospitalizations now at their highest point of the pandemic, the University of Mississippi's Medical Center building a second field hospital with ICU beds.
Cases are definitely surging, and I think both in the data and on the ground, what we're seeing is that this is now a pandemic mostly of the unvaccinated.
More and more vaccine mandates are going into effect. New York City now requiring proof of vaccination for most indoor activities.
We know that vaccination has been the key. We know that vaccination has allowed us to move forward as a city.
And the 35,000 runners expected to take part in the Chicago Marathon will also have to show proof or a negative test. White House health officials say vaccinations are increasing. At least 50% of the eligible populations in every state have gotten at least one dose, though they are hoping to see that percentage go up even more. Lindsay?
Rena, thank you. Still to come with more towns succumbing to fire threat. We take a look back at how people in Paradise, California are doing 2 years after that deadly blaze. And some positive health news from actress Selma Blair. Stay with us.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward facts. ABC News is America's #1 news. Good Morning America, #1 in the morning, 9 years running. World News Tonight with David Muir, #1 in the evening with America's most watched newscast. 2020, the #1 news magazine on Friday nights. The View, the #1 daytime talk show. And ABC News Live, #1 in streaming news. ABC News is America's #1 news.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're going to move back. Let's move back. We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Welcome back. We're tracking several international headlines at this hour. The death toll in Haiti now stands at nearly 2,000 after that powerful quake struck this weekend. Heavy rains from Tropical Storm Grace yesterday only made matters worse as search and rescue efforts on the island continue. New Zealand has announced a nationwide lockdown for at least 3 days after a single case of COVID was detected. It was the first case there in 6 months. Authorities say they are now working under the assumption that that new case is tied to the Delta variant. And explosive wildfires are forcing thousands to evacuate near the French Riviera. Take a look at this dramatic footage taken inside a car. Hundreds of firefighters are working to contain the blazes, which are now in the town of Saint-Tropez. Back here in the U.S. tonight, the West Coast is facing imminent fire danger as forecasted high winds are spreading flames incredibly rapidly. And right now, the Dixie Fire is exploding near the town that burned to the ground in 2018, bringing back, of course, traumatic memories for many. Wildfire reporter and author Lizzie Johnson's latest book, Paradise, One Town Struggled to Survive an American Wildfire, retells the story of the deadliest disaster back in 2018, and sadly, a reality more communities are having to get used to. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Lizzie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It seems that wildfires are raging beyond what many have considered to be normal in the past. Can you walk us through the factors that contributed to the Paradise Fire in November of 2018? Was it something that could have been avoided?
Yeah, so the Paradise Fire of 2018 was started by a downed Pacific Gas and Electric transmission line, very similar to what might have happened with the Dixie Fire. The utility reported to a state commission recently that they think they might have started that fire. So it was entirely preventable, really high winds, and within a few hours, the fire reached Paradise and tore through town, leveled most of it, homes, businesses, churches, most of the heart of downtown, and 3 years later, nearly the town is still struggling to come back.
And as you said, in a matter of just 2 to 3 hours, the entire town was lost. You write the first code red alert, which indicates to residents that they need to evacuate, failed to reach close to 3,000 people. As you describe it, there was no robust system. What went wrong exactly?
Yeah, so the town of Paradise, like a lot of places across California, had prepared for situations they had dealt with in the past, which is fires that moved a little slower, didn't envelop the entire town at once. And so it was this perfect storm of events that led to the point where they couldn't really send out evacuation alerts. A lot of those cell towers were going down. It was a voluntary system, which meant that you couldn't get an alert unless you had signed up in advance. And there were also issues within the system to the point where when Butte County decided to try and issue an Amber Alert style message, they hit an error and the message never went out. So a lot of people woke up that morning to fire in their backyards, fire in their front yards, and had no idea what was happening because they did not get an alert.
You vividly walk the reader through the entire day of November 8th, 2018, with rather gripping accounts of the trauma and the heroism. Talk to us about the one particular school bus driver on board bus 963 who got stuck with a bus full of kids.
Yeah, so Kevin McKay was one of those people that day who just showed incredible heroism. He had gone back to school. He wanted to get his teaching degree to teach at his alma mater, Paradise High. And as part of that was driving a school bus part-time. That way he could also go to classes. And so he had only been on that bus a few months when the fire hit. And he found himself with this decision of, how do I get this bus full of children out of town safely when the roads are on fire? And there's just a hellscape outside. He did get them out. He was one of those people that was truly a hero.
It's now been nearly 3 years since Paradise. What's it like there now?
Yeah, so Paradise is trying to rebuild, but it's very, very slow. even a year after the fire, only about 11 homes had been rebuilt. Earlier this year, that count went up to nearly 600, but still, if you think about the thousands of houses that burned down, it's not very much. So what you see is just block after block, there's a lot of empty lots where the debris has been cleared, but there's just vegetation. People haven't come back yet. And so it's just a shell of what it once was.
What do we all need to learn from what happened that day as we enter now a daunting 48-hour period in California where high winds are already causing fires to explode?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing to realize is that, climate change and these issues that we've had with fires in the past, the forest not being managed correctly, houses going up in places where they shouldn't, houses being built in fire-prone areas in ways that aren't fireproofing, that's something that we're having to live with now. And that, these fires are going to happen year after year because climate change is here and it's making all of those variables worse. And so you can't look at a fire like the Dixie Fire and just expect that it's the last one we'll see in a while. It's short-sighted. What we saw in Paradise, what we're seeing last year, the year before, this year, it's going to continue, and we need to make peace with that.
Right, what we are seeing now, certainly. Lizzie Johnson, we thank you so much for your time. Paradise, One Town Struggle to Survive an American Wildfire is available now wherever books are sold. Turning now to an update on actress Selma Blair. She says she is now in remission from the multiple sclerosis she was diagnosed with 3 years ago, and her prognosis is great. ABC's Will Reeve has those details.
Actress Selma Blair announcing her MS is in remission.
I've been given a second chance at life.
While promoting her new Discovery Plus documentary introducing Selma Blair, the 49-year-old, known for roles in movies like Cruel Intentions and Legally Blonde, shared the news with a Television Critics Association panel, saying, "My prognosis is great. Stem cell treatments put me in remission. It took about a year after stem cell for the inflammation and lesions to really go down. MS, short for multiple sclerosis, is an autoimmune disease that can cause vision loss, pain, fatigue, and impaired coordination.
It damages the nerves and their insulation, and that damage then leads to the accumulation of neurologic symptoms."
Blair says she endured chemotherapy and a stem cell transplant to essentially reboot her nervous system.
By eliminating the abnormal immune system in MS and then allowing it to redevelop more normally, it can effectively treat the abnormal inflammation in the disease.
Remission in MS can last for weeks, months, and even years, but it doesn't mean the disease is cured.
There's no indication of disease activity. Sometimes people in remission in MS have some residual symptoms. Increasingly, we realize that the nervous system can repair itself. We need to get the disease under control to stop more damage and to allow the natural repair processes to take hold.
In 2019, Robin Roberts spoke with Blair after her diagnosis. Her difficulty speaking, a symptom of MS.
Let's go back. When you were first diagnosed, what initially went through your mind?
I cried. I had tears. They weren't tears of panic. They were tears of knowing I now had to give in to a body that had loss of control. And there was some relief in that, because ever since my son was born, I was in an MS flare-up and didn't know. And I was giving it everything to seem normal.
Now, Blair says, her struggle has given her perspective and hope to suddenly start to find an identity and a safety in me to figure out boundaries, time management, and energy. I'm having the time of my life.
Glad to hear that update. Our thanks to Will. And that'll do it for us. That's our show for tonight. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.
Now, when it matters most, the straightforward fact.